Yeah, so apartheid is actually a Afrikaans word. Afrikaans was like a language that the Dutch who colonized South Africa kind of developed. It's very close to modern Dutch, but apartheid literally just means apartness. And it was a legal doctrine that was made in Southern Africa to allow the white minority to kind of dominate the kind of black majority. And I wrote my undergraduate dissertation on the role of Muslims in the South African anti-apartheid struggle. And the role of Muslims in the struggle is very interesting because Muslims made up 1% of the population. But when democracy happened in South Africa in 1993, the Muslims made up 16% of the first parliament. So they're 1% of the population, but 16% of the first parliament. So Muslims were very, very much involved in the struggle. People like Ibrahim Rasool, people like the late Sheikh Siraj Hendricks, who studied under Muhammad ibn Alawi al-Maliki, a lot of these sorts of people. So when we say Israel is an apartheid state today, we're basically saying one of two things. One is we're saying that Israel is like apartheid South Africa. And the second thing that we're saying is that Israel fits a legal definition. So after apartheid ended in South Africa in 1998, the Rome Statute was kind of passed, which defined apartheid as a crime against humanity. And they say that, and what's interesting about the Rome Statute is it doesn't include a single reference to South Africa. It has one reference to Southern Africa, but it says apartheid is a legal definition. It's not about being like South Africa, but it's about fitting these kind of guidelines. And Human Rights Watch released a report called Beyond the Threshold, where they said many years ago, I think around 2020, that Israel has met this threshold. And the three kind of main kind of guidelines for being an apartheid state is first, that they have intent to maintain racial domination of one racial group over another, which for even those who don't know anything about what Israel is doing, they don't know the specifics of the occupation, all of that, it's not very complicated to say that Israel intends to have one racial group dominate and the other racial group not to dominate. If we look at like the West Bank, Israeli settlers live there as full citizens. They are encouraged by the state to live in this place, which is a violation of international law. Palestinians live there without statehood, and they are actively they have every incentive to leave. So there's an incentive for Jews to live in a specific place and for indigenous Palestinians to not live in that place. So that first guideline is kind of very easily met. The other one is systematic oppression of one racial group over the other, which is also very clear. If we look at what's happening in Gaza today, we see how even Israelis are treated in the West Bank and Israel proper. Like that's very clear. And then the third is one or more inhumane acts carried out on a widespread or like systemic scale. So by a legal definition, Israel fits the standards of apartheid very easily. And this has been stated by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. So that's apartheid as a legal definition.
Could you tell me, I'm curious, any other states fit the bill?
So this is interesting. Yeah. There have been accusations. I remember one time Cornel West was asked about this because they said, oh, you know, this Palestinian intellectual did a PhD at a Israeli university. So therefore, Israel is not an apartheid state. And Cornel West said, well, W.E. Du Bois, he did a PhD at Harvard in apartheid America. So you could say that a lot of other states had systems of apartheid. Yeah. A lot of South Africans have also leveled the accusation against India because they say because of the Hindu nationalism and all this sort of stuff, India also has a system of apartheid against Muslims.
Well, I would say that India doesn't have to try to fit the first bill of making sure that one group dominates over the other because their numbers are already way imbalanced in Hindus to Muslims already. So, but the other two, I guess you could, is there a systematic or systemic oppression of Muslims? Is it in the law or is it some unwritten rule?
That's where it becomes difficult. In terms of like on a kind of, if you look at NGOs and legal organizations and stuff, the charge has been leveled against Israel, but I don't think that there's any other state that with the same firmness has been accused of being an apartheid state. And even if you look at the way South Africans view Israel, South Africans have kind of this special kind of solidarity with like the Palestinians. Like Desmond Tutu, he went to Israel. He said, I go there, I see the checkpoints, I see these systems, and it's a mirror image of what I envisioned under apartheid. Yeah, and it's actually interesting. Before the 90s, apartheid was not a bad word.
Yeah.
And the prime minister of South Africa of apartheid South Africa in the 1950s, he wrote actually a book, or there's a book called The Secret Alliance. And it talks about the Israeli and kind of South African kind of alliance. And the prime minister of South Africa actually once said that Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. But he didn't mean it in the way we meant it today. For them, apartheid was a thing of pride. Similarly, the way people talk about Zionism today, right? Like Zionism is kind of becoming a bad word, but in Israeli we'll say we're proudly Zionists.
Yeah.
So back then, that was how they used the word apartheid.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's turn to Muhammad.
Yeah,
what do you have
so
to
I
add to
think,
this?
yeah, I think on that last point about the, so specifically targeted against Muslims, I think one of the things that we should keep in mind is sometimes what oppressors do is that they find another term to refer to a group of people, and that term encompasses that group of people, but it allows them basically to speak about it in a way that may be more palatable to the rest of us. So instead of referring to a particular religious group, you refer to them based on their national identity. Instead of referring to a particular ethnic group, you refer to them based on their national identity.
Mm.
And because we have this conflation of the nation and the state, and especially in the modern world, we tend to look at that and think of that as being more fair somehow and perhaps more justified because it's a conflict between two nations, and we think of that as being a common feature of our experience in the modern period, as opposed to being a conflict between an oppressor and between a particular ethnic group that is being wiped out, or a particular religious group that's being wiped out. And so I think that's one of the things that's really, really important for us to kind of keep in the back of our mind. So sometimes the way that you hear, and this happens in the media very, very often, and it's really unfortunate, is that the message that you're getting is a message that's disseminated by those parties that are interested parties. So in the case of what we're hearing from Palestine right now, you're getting information that's disseminated by the IDF. You're getting information that's disseminated by specific groups that have an interested stake in what's happening right now. And so you have to ask the question, are those interested parties, are they supporting a more powerful, more dominant power, or are they supporting those people that are weaker and those people who are more susceptible to being taken advantage of? And that's very, very easy to do. So it's quite easy to look at this conflict, and a lot of people do look at this conflict as being a religious conflict. But there are a lot of Palestinian Christians, and in fact, if you look at in like a recent history, the two most dominant figures in speaking out against what happens in Palestine, specifically from academia, happen to be a Jew and a Christian. Noam Chomsky, who is Jewish, and Edward Said, who's Christian, which tells you that this conflict isn't a religious conflict. It's a conflict that goes deeper than that.